The lobby went silent before anyone understood why. It happened the way silence always happens in places like that. Not all at once, but in a slow ripple, like a stone dropped into still water. First the concierge stopped typing. Then the couple near the fountain paused their conversation. Then the bellboy, who had been spinning a luggage cart with the casual boredom of someone who had done it 1,000 times, let it roll to a stop on its own. And everyone, every polished, perfumed, expensively dressed person standing inside the Grand Alden Hotel, turned to look at the revolving door, because something unusual had just walked through it. They were old. That was the first thing you noticed. The kind of old that does not apologize for itself. Deep lines carved into their faces like rivers that have been running a long, long time. The man walked slowly, his back slightly bent, but his chin was up, his hand was behind him, and in it was his wife's hand, and he held it the way you hold something you are afraid of losing. She was smaller than him, her white hair damp from the rain outside, pressed flat against her forehead. Her coat was the color of old mud, a long, heavy thing that had probably been beautiful once, 30 years ago. His jacket had a tear near the left pocket, carefully stitched back together with thread that did not quite match. They carried one bag between them. Just one, a brown leather bag, so old the handle had been wrapped in cloth to keep it from falling apart. They walked to the front desk. The lobby of the Grand Alden was not the kind of place that made you feel welcome unless you were wearing the right things. The floors were white marble that clicked under heels. The chandelier above, a massive, glittering thing made of 10,000 pieces of crystal, threw tiny rainbows across the ceiling at certain times of day. The walls were covered in gold-framed artwork, and between two of the larger paintings hung a portrait, an old black and white photograph, enlarged and given a heavy frame, of two people standing in front of a building that was barely finished, smiling at the camera with the particular joy of people who had just done something that cost them everything. Nobody looked at that portrait much anymore. The man at the front desk was named Marcus. He was 34 years old, and he had worked his way up to general manager by being exactly the kind of person this hotel rewarded. Sharp clothes, sharp words, and a smile that appeared and disappeared like a light on a switch. He wore a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His shoes were polished to a shine, so bright you could almost see yourself in them. He believed, with the quiet certainty of someone who has never been seriously questioned, that the Grand Alden was a place of standards. And standards, in his mind, meant keeping certain things out. He looked up when the couple approached the desk. Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly. More like the expression of someone who has just found a weed growing in a garden they are very proud of. "Can I help you?" he said. His voice was polite the way a closed door is polite. "We would like a room," the old man said. His voice was quiet and steady and carried the kind of calm that only comes from a life that has already survived its worst days. One room, one night. Marcus looked at them. He let the look go on slightly too long. His eyes moved from the wet white hair to the stitched jacket to the single battered bag sitting on his marble floor, leaving a small wet mark. "This is the Grand Alden," Marcus said, as though the name itself was a complete answer. "Yes," the old man said. "I know. Our rooms begin at $800 a night." "That's fine." Marcus blinked. Something flickered in his expression. Not respect, not yet, but a small hesitation. Then it passed. Because people like this did not walk into hotels like this with money. People like this walked into hotels like this by mistake. He had seen it before. People who wandered in from the rain, dazzled by the lights, not understanding where they were. His job, as he understood it, was to redirect them, gently, professionally, and if necessary, firmly. "I'm afraid," Marcus said, straightening his jacket, "we are fully booked this evening." From somewhere behind the couple, a guest laughed. It was a small laugh, quickly swallowed, the kind that happens when someone finds something funny and knows they should not show it. But it was enough. It spread. A low murmur moved through the lobby like a wind. Someone whispered something to the woman beside them. The woman pressed her lips together to hide a smile. The old man heard it. He heard all of it. His jaw tightened, just slightly, just for a moment, and then it relaxed again, He looked at Marcus with eyes that were very still and very dark and very patient. His wife reached up and touched his arm. "It's all right," she said softly. Her voice was so quiet it was almost just breath. "No," he said gently, covering her hand with his. "It is not all right, but we will handle it quietly." He turned back to Marcus. "You said fully booked," the old man said. "But I can see from here that the key for room 14 is still on the board, and rooms 22 and 31 as well." Marcus's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did. "Those rooms are reserved," he said. In the far corner of the lobby, partially hidden behind a tall arrangement of white flowers, a young woman in a housekeeping uniform had stopped moving. Her name was Amara. She was 22 years old and had worked at the Grand Alderton for 7 months. She was holding a stack of fresh towels against her chest, and she was watching everything. She had seen Marcus do this before, not exactly this, but versions of it. She knew what it was. She knew what it felt like, too. She wanted to say something. She looked at the other staff members near the desk. They were all looking down or away, or at their screens. Nobody wanted to be the one who made Marcus angry. Amara pressed the towels tighter against her chest and stayed where she was. The old man looked at Marcus for a long, quiet moment. Then he did something nobody expected. He looked up, not at Marcus, not at the guests who were still murmuring behind him. He looked up at the chandelier above them all, that massive, glittering, 10,000-piece chandelier that threw tiny rainbows on the ceiling. And he looked at it the way you look at something that belongs to you, something you had not seen in a very long time, but have never forgotten. He looked at it like a man coming home. Then he reached slowly into the inside pocket of his old stitch jacket, and the lobby, without quite knowing why, went silent again. What he pulled out was not a wallet. It was not a credit card or a phone, or anything that the people standing in that gleaming lobby would have recognized as proof of worth. It was an envelope, old and soft, the color of weak tea, its edges worn down to a gentle curve from years of being folded and unfolded, and carried close to a body that knew what it contained. He held it the way you hold a letter from someone you loved who is no longer here. Carefully, with full attention, he placed it on the marble desk. Marcus looked at it the way a man looks at something he does not understand but is too proud to say so. He did not touch it. He just looked at it sitting there on his spotless counter, this tired, humble, weightless thing, and waited for an explanation he was already planning to dismiss. "Open it," the old man said. His voice had not changed. It was still quiet, still steady, the kind of voice that has long since stopped needing to shout to be heard. Marcus reached forward slowly, the way you reach for something you expect to be disappointing, and opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, not digital prints, not modern pictures with sharp colors and perfect light. These were old photographs, black and white, slightly faded, their edges soft, the kind of pictures that smell faintly of time when you hold them close. Marcus picked up the first one and looked at it. He stopped. The photograph showed a building, not a finished building, a skeleton of one, steel beams reaching up into an open sky, scaffolding running along the sides like ladders to somewhere important, workers in the background, small and busy, and in the front, standing directly in the center of the frame, 2 young people, a man and a woman. The man had his arm around the woman's shoulder. The woman was laughing. They were both looking at the camera with a particular expression of people who had just done something enormous and terrifying and wonderful and were still catching their breath from it. Marcus looked at the photograph. Then he looked at the old man standing in front of him. Then he looked at the photograph again. His mouth opened slightly, just enough to tell you that something inside him had shifted, a small earthquake, deep and private. He picked up the second photograph. This one showed the chandelier, but it was not hanging yet. It was lying on its side in what looked like a large warehouse, surrounded by workers who were piecing it together by hand, each crystal placed carefully, deliberately, like assembling something sacred. Standing beside it, pointing upward with a kind of joyful authority, was a young woman from the first photograph. She had a scarf around her hair and grease on her hands, and she was smiling, so wide it looked like her face could barely contain it. Marcus's hand moved to the third photograph almost without meaning to. This one showed the lobby. The grand Alderton lobby, but empty, brand new. The marble floor is still unmarked. The walls bare, not yet dressed in their gold-framed paintings. The chandelier above, now hanging, catching light for the first time. And standing beneath it, looking up at it together, were the same two people. Older now than in the first photo, but younger by decades than the people standing at his desk. The man had his head tilted back. The woman had her hand over her heart. The fourth photograph was different from the others. It showed a document, a legal document, handwritten in careful ink, signed at the bottom. Marcus was not a man who missed details. It was, in fact, the thing he was best at. So he read it, and as he read it, the blood in his face did something it rarely did. It drained. Because the names on the document, the names at the top, the names at the bottom, the names written into the foundation of everything this hotel was, were the names of the two people standing in front of him, George and Miriam Alderton. The room moved, not physically. The marble stayed marble. The chandelier kept its 10,000 pieces exactly where they were, but the feeling in the room shifted like weather. You could feel it. The guests who had been murmuring stopped. The staff members who had been looking away looked up. Something was happening, and everyone's body understood it before their minds did. Amara, still standing behind the white flowers with her stack of towels, felt her breath leave her chest. "You," Marcus said. It came out barely above a whisper. It was not a full sentence. It was all he could manage. "We built this hotel," the old man said simply, not with anger, not with the triumphant heat of someone who has been waiting to say this. He said it the way you state a fact that has always been true, whether anyone acknowledged it or not. "My wife and I, 51 years ago, we broke ground in March. We nearly lost everything twice before the walls were finished. We lost our son during the crisis of '94, not to the hotel, but the hotel was why we could not go to him in time." He paused. "Let that sit. We sold our shares 15 years ago when Miriam became ill, and we needed to be somewhere quiet. We never planned to come back." "Then why?" Marcus started. "Because she asked to see the chandelier one more time," the old man said. He looked at his wife. She was looking up at the chandelier the way the photograph had captured her looking at it 50 years ago, with her hand near her heart, her eyes full of something too large and too old to be called by a simple name. "That is all. One night, one room. We did not come here to cause trouble. We came because this place is part of us, and she wanted to remember it while she still can." The lobby was completely silent now. Not the polite silence of people pretending not to listen. The real silence. The kind that only happens when something true is in a room and everyone feels the weight of it pressing down, asking them to be honest about what they have just witnessed. Marcus stood very still. He was not a man who was used to being wrong. He was used to being the one who assessed situations, made decisions, maintained standards. But the word standards was doing something uncomfortable in his mind right now. Rearranging itself, asking to be looked at from a different angle. Because what were his standards exactly? What had they just produced? He had turned away the people whose names were carved into the building's foundation. He had let a lobby full of guests laugh at the couple who had paid for the marble beneath their feet. Amara stepped out from behind the flowers. She did not plan it. Her body simply decided before she did. She walked across the lobby, her footsteps soft, her towel still held against her chest. And she stopped beside the couple. She looked at the old man. She looked at the old woman. And then she did something she had never done to a guest before, not in 7 months of working here. She bowed. Not a formal, trained hotel bow. A real one, low and slow, from somewhere genuine inside her. The old woman looked at her with eyes that had seen enough of the world to know the difference between performance and sincerity. She reached out and touched Amara's cheek with one soft hand. "Thank you, child," she said. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The old man looked at him with those very still, very patient eyes. "Respect," the old man said quietly, "matters more than wealth. It always has. It always will. I did not come here to embarrass you, But I will not pretend we were not embarrassed first. It was not an attack. It was not a threat. It was something harder to defend against than either of those things. It was a truth, spoken gently, by a man who had earned the right to speak it loudly and had chosen not to. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. Small, quiet, like the first fracture in ice before the whole surface begins to give way. He reached beneath the desk. He pulled out a key. A real key. Heavy brass, old-fashioned, attached to a tag with a room number pressed into it in gold lettering. The finest suite in the Grand Alderton. He placed it on the desk with both hands. Carefully, like an offering. The elevator doors closed behind them like a quiet exhale. And the lobby, that grand, marble, chandelier-lit lobby that had just witnessed something it would never quite recover from, let out a collective breath it did not know it had been holding. People looked at each other. Some looked at the floor. A few looked at the portrait on the wall, that black and white photograph in its heavy frame, the one nobody ever really stopped to look at, and saw it, perhaps the first time, as something more than decoration. They saw it as a face. Two faces. People. The guests dispersed slowly, quietly, the way people leave a church after service that genuinely moved them. Not rushing, not talking loudly, carrying something fragile inside them that they did not want to spill. Marcus stood at his desk for a long time without moving. The suite was on the top floor. It had tall windows that ran from ceiling to floor, and through them, even the gray, wet evening, you could see the city spreading outward in every direction. Lights began to blink on as the sky darkened, streets below carrying the tiny movements of people living their ordinary, unknowing lives. There was a fireplace, fresh flowers, a bed dressed in white linen, so clean it looked like it had never been touched. Miriam walked to the window. She stood there for a long time, her old coat still on, her damp white hair beginning to dry in the warmth of the room. George stood behind her. He did not speak. He understood that some moments are not helped by words, that some things a person needs to feel completely, without interruption, without the kindness of someone trying to soften them. Then she began to cry, not the loud, gasping cry of fresh pain, the quiet kind, the kind that comes from somewhere very deep and very old, the kind of crying that has been waiting patiently for the right moment, the right room, the right window to stand at. Her shoulders moved slightly. That was all. George put his arms around her from behind and held her the way he had held her for more than 50 years. Not trying to stop anything, just making sure she knew he was there. "We built something real," she whispered. "We did," he said. "I just wanted to see it once more." "I know." He pressed his cheek against the top of her head. "I know." They stood at the window together as the city lit up below them. Two old people holding 50 years of shared history between them, like something precious and heavy and irreplaceable, and the room held them both without asking anything in return. Downstairs, Marcus sat in his office with the door closed. The photographs were on his desk in front of him. He had asked permission to hold on to them for the evening. The old man had agreed, without making him feel the weight of the request, which somehow made Marcus feel the weight of it more. He sat looking at the young faces in those faded black and white images for a long time, the woman laughing beside the chandelier, the man pointing up at steel beams reaching into an open sky. Two people building something from nothing, at a cost that no balance sheet could fully measure. He thought about his morning. He had woken up and chosen his suit carefully. He had checked the lobby's cleanliness with a practiced eye. He had felt, as he often did, the quiet satisfaction of being in charge of something impressive. He had believed, as he almost always did, that he understood this hotel, what it was, what it stood for, what it required. He had been wrong about all of it, not about the cleanliness, not about the management, but about the center of it, the thing that all the marble and crystal and gold framing was supposed to serve. He had turned a building into a performance, a place designed to welcome people, into a place designed to impress people. And somewhere in that shift, something essential had been lost, something the two people upstairs had understood from the very beginning, when they were young and broke and building walls with borrowed money and enormous hope. He picked up his phone. He called his head of staff training. "I need to build a new program," he said. "Not optional. Mandatory. For everyone, including me. He paused. It needs to start with one question. One question that every person on the staff should be able to answer before they greet a single guest. Another pause. The question is, what does this person deserve? Not what do they look like. Not what are they wearing. What do they deserve as a human being? The moment they walked through that door, there was a silence on the other end of the line. Yes, sir, his training manager said quietly. Marcus put the phone down. He sat for another moment. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket from habit, and walked back out into the lobby. Amara was restocking the towel cabinet near the east corridor when Marcus found her. She straightened when she saw him coming, the reflex of someone who has learned to be careful around authority. But Marcus stopped a respectful distance away and stood with his hands clasped in front of him. Not the posture of a manager addressing staff, but something closer to the posture of one person speaking honestly to another. What you did tonight, he said, took more courage than anything I managed. Amara looked at him carefully. She had learned, in 7 months, not to trust sudden warmth from people in positions above her. But there was something different in his face tonight. Something that had not been there this morning. Something that looked unexpectedly like humility. I just did what felt right, she said. That is exactly the point, Marcus said. You knew what felt right. I had forgotten. He looked at the cabinet of towels, the corridor, the small and unglamorous corner of the hotel that most guests never saw. The part where the real work happened. I am going to recommend you for a senior guest relations position. Not because of tonight, although tonight matters. Because the quality you showed, that instinct for human dignity, that is what this hotel is supposed to be built on. It was built on it, once, a long time ago, by people who remembered it better than we do. Amara was quiet for a moment. Will you tell them that? She asked. The couple upstairs. Will you tell them that something is going to change? Marcus nodded slowly. Tomorrow morning, before they leave. He kept his word. At 7 a.m, George and Miriam Alderton came down from the suite. They were dressed the same as the night before, the same worn coats, the same careful, unhurried movement through a lobby that felt different in the morning light. Or perhaps the lobby had not changed. Perhaps only the people in it had. Marcus was waiting at the desk. Not behind it, beside it. That small difference mattered more than he could have explained. He spoke for several minutes. He did not make excuses. He did not hide behind professionalism or procedure. He said what he had done, and what it had cost him, and what he intended to do about it going forward. He said it clearly and without decoration, the way an honest person speaks when they have stopped trying to protect their own image. George listened to all of it without interrupting. When Marcus finished, the old man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, accountability without cruelty is a rare thing. I appreciate it. He extended his hand. Marcus shook it, and for the first time since the previous evening, something in his chest that had been very tight began, slowly, to loosen. Miriam touched the desk lightly with one hand as they turned to leave, a small gesture, almost unconscious, like patting the shoulder of an old friend. She looked once more at the chandelier above them, all 10,000 pieces of it, throwing tiny rainbows across the ceiling in the early morning light. We chose that crystal ourselves, she said softly, to no one in particular. We drove 4 hours to the warehouse to pick it by hand. George wanted the kind that caught warm light. He said cold light makes people feel alone. She smiled at the chandelier, the way you smile at something that has kept a promise across 50 years. Then she took her husband's hand, and they walked to the revolving door, and they went through it together, back out into the world. Months passed. The grand Alderton changed. Not all at once. Real change never happens all at once. It happened in small, daily decisions, in the way staff were trained to greet people before assessing them, in the question Marcus had built into every orientation for new employees. What does this person deserve? In the way Amara, now heading guest relations, taught her team to look at the person first and everything else second. Word spread the way good things spread. Slowly, honestly, through the mouths of people who had experienced something real and wanted others to know it existed. A travel writer stayed for a weekend and wrote that the Grand Alderton had something increasingly rare in luxury hospitality, genuine warmth, The kind that could not be manufactured or trained into existence through scripts alone. The kind that had to be believed first. The hotel's reputation shifted. New guests came not only for the marble and the chandelier and the gold-framed artwork, but for something they'd heard about and wanted to feel for themselves. Something that had no name in any brochure. And in the lobby, between two large paintings, the old black and white portrait of George and Miriam Alderton remained in its heavy frame. But someone, no one ever admitted who, had placed a small handwritten card beneath it, just a few words, in neat, careful letters. They built this place. Every stone, every crystal, every welcome. Guests stopped to read it now. They looked at the young faces in the photograph, the woman laughing, the man reaching upward, and something in the image settled into them the way true things do, quietly and permanently. And if you believe, as George Alderton did, that respect is the universal currency, the one that holds its value when everything else collapses, then the Grand Alderton, in the end, became the richest place in the city, not because of what it cost to stay there, but because of what it cost them to learn what staying truly means. If this story moves something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Like if you believe dignity should never depend on what you're wearing. And subscribe, because more stories like this one are coming. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, told the way they deserve to be told.